Blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. So in this video, I just want to talk about a particular corruption within the Irish government, and that is to do with the making of legislation, the office of custodian of the Constitution, i.e. the President, the accountability of the President to the courts of the land, and the ability for the courts to conclude that a legislation that they know hasn't been tested for its constitutionality must be considered or presumed constitutional. Now, mindless. These are unreasonable progressions and unconstitutional, and therefore treasonous and seditious. So let's go back to the start and preface. When legislation is made in Ireland, democratic processes have to be observed. In other words, the Irish people have to be consulted on what is and what isn't allowed to be enacted into the legislature. They cannot just wiggle the pen or the quill and alter the office of the President in its principal function. They cannot just wiggle the quill and say this is now legislation. They can't do that. This is a democracy. They can't suddenly say the President is not accountable to the courts of this land. Who in their right mind would justify or attempt to, because of course they can't, but who would attempt to justify that the President is not or should not be accountable to the courts of Ireland if found in misconduct in his office as custodian of the Constitution, which is a matter of national security? And I say that not lightly, but very seriously, because the President's principal task is to ensure that bills that are presented to him or proposed should be tested for their constitutionality as a prerequisite condition, so prior to enactment. Now, if the President is saying, I don't have to do my job and I'm not answerable to the courts, whose President is he? The Irish taxpayer are paying his wages, a hefty wage, but he's claiming that he's not accountable to our courts. But how can he be wielding a power he doesn't observe or submit to? How can he be safeguarding a constitution that he's outside of the perimeter of in terms of its reach in holding him accountable? So they're saying that the President is not accountable to the laws of this land if he's found breaking them while in his office, as though the one who is most endowed with the most important task in terms of ratification as to whether bills are constitutional or not before their admission into the legislature to be observed by the public as being lawful, if he's saying that his position is not one that has accountability with it, then what is the safety of his office? What is the accountability of his office? And what is custodian of the Constitution if he claims that he doesn't have to observe the principal task of the custodian, which is to test the constitutionality of bills prior to their enactment? So if his office is compromised, national security is compromised, because his office is the observation of the law and its implementation in all writings, such that no writing would oppose the Constitution fundamentally, as does many legislature today. So it's no surprise that when they're saying the President doesn't have to act as custodian, that there would be an onslaught and an influx of unconstitutional legislation. And we've identified it. I brought it to be tested before the High Court of Ireland. It was appealed, and then it was judicially reviewed in the Court of Appeal in Ireland. The High Court failed. They abandoned the test of the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. Even though in the same case, the very same case now, mind you, they judged that I had been wrongfully imprisoned and wrongfully placed under a civil order stating that I couldn't speak for 2 years. And that went full term. I wasn't allowed to speak under threat of and duress of arrest and imprisonment for 2 years in Wexford Town. And they didn't compensate me a penny, guys. No restitution order was given and no reparation after they identified those 2 injustices were perpetrated against my person. And that of the High Court of this land under Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan, who should have, by all means, adhering to the Constitution of Ireland, to which she is duty bound to make restitution, by which she is duty bound to make restitution to those who have injustices perpetrated against them by the state. So she further committed an injustice after acknowledging 2 had been committed in failing to make reparation, or by failing to make reparation and restitution. So she added to the injustices perpetrated against me. So it shouldn't surprise you that she wouldn't make restitution. And the fact that she didn't shows that she agreed with those who had done the injustices against me, because she failed to make restitution or even raise the point. When she's duty bound to motion for my restitution, for my compensation. So the fact that she didn't do that exposes her hand and explains why she didn't carry out the test of the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act, but stated in her conclusion, it remains an open question as to whether those sections are constitutional or not. Well, why would it remain an open question? She was tasked with testing them. Why would it ever remain an open question? She's acknowledging there's ambiguity surrounding the sections and electing not to carry out the test. But that's not reasonable. She has identified that those sections are questionable. It remains an open question, but has elected, while she was duty bound to test those sections, to abandon the test instead. It's mindless corruption. It's blatant and overt corruption that Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan engaged. She was duty bound once she committed and brought the barristers of law together. They were all brought together. It took them ages to get ready in preparation for this constitutional test of this section. And then they just abandoned it mid-case. I wasn't even told. My name was being used in the case. I wasn't even told. Ended up on the court website, courts.ie, before I knew. That they just abandoned the test. Imagine abandoning a test in the High Court and then saying it remains an open question whether it's lawful or not. That's mad. It's actual madness. Then the state appealed. I didn't appeal. The state appealed because they wanted my acquittal overthrown. They weren't happy that they'd done enough harm to me at that stage. They were going in for the kill. So it got to Court of Appeal level, and the judicial review was done, and they didn't even mention compensation. €150 for my day's trip to Dublin they gave me. €150. So they recognised that I should be compensated for my day in Dublin, but not my month in prison. They identified that I should be compensated for my day in Dublin, but not my 2 years reduction of liberty, to the loss of freedom of expression in Wexford Down. For 2 years? That's mindless. That's not sanity. We acknowledge that you've been put out by this to the tune of €150. But a month in prison. Pff. Do you know that it's £6,000 a day for unlawful imprisonment in the UK? And we work on similar principles here. That would be £180,000. What's that in euros? I get €150 for my bus fare to Dublin. That's the best our Court of Appeal can do. Then, about the sections of the Constitution, what did they think about that, and what Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan did? They left that at the High Court. They didn't further investigate that. All the barrister of the state said, "Oh yeah, there was nothing done about that." There was nothing done about that. So what? You're just going to continue to bury it again at Court of Appeal level because the High Court failed to do what we paid them to do. Now we're just going to dismiss that. Oh, there was nothing done about that. And the Court of Appeal didn't investigate the matter any further. They didn't investigate the matter any further. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? No restitution, no compensation. That's a felony. They're not adhering to the Constitution of Ireland, even though they themselves ruled that the injustices had been perpetrated. They failed to make restitution, even though they're constitutionally duty bound to do it. Look how bold they are in their crimes. They're just committing felonies left, right and centre. It's a free-for-all. Then the Court of Appeal tell us that according to sections and in reference to sections which were brought before the High Court, that Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan said remained an open question as to whether they were lawful or not. So even if they were to go by the judgment or the ruling or the conclusion of the High Court to inform where they would take over, she said it remains an open question whether they're lawful or not, and the Court of Appeal did no further investigation in a judicial review. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And then they said, we must presume that they are lawful. How can we do that? We don't lack the Constitution to tell us that these are lawful or that they are not lawful. If you do not lack the Constitution, you cannot make the presumption. For example, here I have the Bible. So if somebody says, what does the Bible say in Genesis chapter 2 verse 3? I can't say, well, presumptively. Why not? Because I have the Bible here. Why would I ever sanely make the presumption when I can read and I have the Bible? I go to it, chapter 2 verse 3. How we said? Go to it, we say. Chapter 2, Genesis, verse 3. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Can I make a presumption on that? Can I make a presumption? I have it here. I can't make a presumption. So, if the Constitution must be present in all courts in this land, How can we presume something constitutional? If judges are studied in constitutional law, if the president is studied in constitutional law, solicitors, the guards, the citizen should be, why are we making presumptions? We have the Constitution. This is a concealment effort on the side of the Court of Appeal. They're trying to conceal those sections, while they know that they tell guards that they can prosecute and represent each other's evidence in each other's absence and operate out of jurisdiction in civil matters. They know that about them. And these are all crimes. These all act against the Constitution of Ireland. But they're telling us they're presumptively constitutional. But you were tasked with testing them. It remains an open question as to whether they're constitutional. Oh, so the Court of Appeal will judicially review. It's presumptively constitutional. But none of those courts lacked the faculty or the presence of the Constitution. They did not lack the learnedness or the presence of the written law so that they can make the presumption. What did we say? Genesis chapter 2 verse 3. Let's go again. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. I can't make the presumption. I'm not in a position to. I can't. I can't presume on what it says in chapter 2 verse 3, because I can check. You can't presume something's constitutional, because you can check. Why would you elect not to? That's the question. Why would I ever say to you, I can't? Remains an... You say, what does it say in chapter 2 verse 3? Remains an open question. But you have the Bible there. Remains an open question. But you're supposed to know the law. Remains an open question. But wouldn't that mean that people could be obeying things that aren't lawful as though they were lawful? It's presumptively constitutional. But that's mad. That's mad. What does it say in chapter 2 verse 3 in Genesis? But I can't presume. Why? Because it's there, look. So if you have the Constitution in your hand, or in your court, which you must, because every court in Ireland has to have a constitution or they can't ratify the warrant of the court. The warrant of the court requires the presence of the Constitution. It requires the faculty of the judge to be informed on what the Constitution is, such that he cannot make a presumption, such that he can implement the law. So why would a court judge, especially of the High Court or the Court of Appeal, these highest courts of the land, whose duty it is to know and implement the law, be making presumptions on it when they have it in their hand and in their learnedness? So I can't presume on what it says on chapter 2 verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Where's the room for the presumption? But I'm telling you that the Court of Appeal of Ireland have written down presumptively constitutional. But if the custodian of the Constitution is doing his job, how does anything get into legislation that's an open question as to whether it's lawful or not? Oh, he's not doing his job because he didn't bother to check. Why would he do that as defender of the Constitution? He's a defender, he's a guardian of our written law, electing not to check whether writings are lawful or not. But that's mad. Are we now paying madmen? I hope not. But I know these men are not stupid. I hope they're not mad. Because only a madman would say, you're paying me to guard your house, but I haven't checked if it's safe. Now pay me. But that's barbaric and brutish and uncivil. And certainly not reasonable. Is my house safe, O guardian of mine? I have not checked. Now pay me, master. But you can presume your house is safe. Can I? But why would I pay you then? To guard the house? Or the Constitution, or whatever the case may be. Why would I do that? It's mad, guys. It's mad. The President doesn't have to check the constitutionality of bills prior to enacting them into the legislature, but does he even read them? And if he studied in constitutional law and he's reading them, how can he forget what he knows about the Constitution just to read the bills? But that's mad. It's like a mechanic looking at your car and forgetting everything he knows about cars. So he'll say, that's presumptively an NCT pass, but haven't you run it through the tests? Don't you know? Presume it's safe to drive. But why would you elect this course of action? But that's mad. It's unwise. It's unreasonable. It's folly. And you know where folly brings you? In harm's way. So, we cannot presume in the presence of the evidence because presumption means in the lack of evidence. It can only be made in the lack of evidence. It can only be made in the lack of evidence. Is the claim, therefore, by the Court of Appeal in Ireland that we don't have a constitution? How do they ratify the warrant of the court? How do they validate the warrant and establish jurisdiction? How do they do it? I want to know. That's why I brought the test. To see, is this constitutional or not? I want to know. Why are they running from me? What have they got to hide? I just want to know is something lawful or not. In the court. Where else would you go? To find out if something's lawful or not. Why would the court leave it an open question if they've identified that it is one, when they've been tasked with testing it to remove the ambiguity or the questionableness of it? Is it questionable? It's not questionable. Why? Because they don't lack the Constitution to check. It's either constitutional or it's not. The question is it constitutional? It doesn't remain an open question without deciding to leave it open. So the decision was made removing the question. Do you get what I'm saying? These are people learned in constitutional law. They can't look at something and not know whether it's lawful or not. The fact that they didn't test it removes the question. Obviously it's not lawful, and they're trying to hide that fact and protect the people involved. They didn't bring it into the court and then abandon it for no reason. Unless they started foaming at the mouth. They didn't think about why they were abandoning it. Do you get what I'm saying to you? They planned this for a year. They were in the High Court testing it. Right, we're going to test this, number 1 on the schedule, we're testing it. Then they said, remains an open question as to whether it's constitutional or not. How does it remain an open question unless you elect it to remain an open question? Which means it can't be an open question because you've already spent a year preparing for this. So both sides would have done extensive looking into this prior to the starting of the court case. And you're telling me, as Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan of the High Court, that you went against 2 barristers' great effort and extent of work and insight and acumen in the testing of the sections for their constitutionality, and you chose to abandon the test? And you expect all of us standing around here to believe that you well-learned individuals don't know whether it's lawful or not? But you prepared for a long time. You looked into the matter. You must have to open the court case. Court in session. Number 1 on the schedule, test the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. Remains an open question as to whether it's lawful or not. But this man had injustices perpetrated against him, 2 of them, under these, by way of these sections. But we will abandon it. It's like cancelling the test of a car because you identify the engine's not working. This is sedition. This is serious treason. This is an attempted overthrow of Ireland. And they can't hide it any longer. There's too much weighty evidence against them. They're too exposed. They've nowhere to go. They've gone to the Court of Appeal. They're at Court of Appeal level, and they're telling us to presume things constitutional. And the President's not answerable for the fact that he didn't check in the first place. Because somebody told him he didn't have to. Behind the Irish people's back. That's what we're looking at here. That's the degree of decrepit criminality and corruption. It's disgusting conduct. It's reprehensible. There's nothing good about it. They're treating us as fools. They're treating us as fools. Presumptively constitutional. What's presumptively lawful? Judge, I presumed that it was okay to take the bag of money out of the post office when I asked the nice lady to take it out of the cash register. I presumed it was lawful. I said, please. It's just a matter of the sawn-off shotgun, John. Well, I presumed it was lawful. Presumptively lawful? How do they hold court? On the basis of presumption. I'm now arresting you under presumptively constitutional section of the open question. Are you only presumptively arresting me, guard, are you? Right, well, I'm too busy for presumptive arrest. It remains an open question whether you're arresting me or not. Where do you go from there? But the madhouse. The madhouse. Presumptively constitutional? Are they serious? Do they take us for fools? It's like somebody opened up the gate of hell and every decrepit and foul spirit walking sideways out of the pit and into the judges in the courts there. They're just going blah 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 blah. Because it doesn't make any sense. Now, what's the first thing a criminal wants to do? He wants you to think that he's not committing a crime first. But if you identify as committing a crime, he wants to tell you that he's not accountable for it. It's not his fault. And you can't do anything about it anyway. It's like a little child when you catch them their hand in the cookie jar. I didn't know that I shouldn't put my hand in the cookie jar. I thought it was okay. I told you that it wasn't okay to put your hand in the cookie jar. The president isn't so ill-educated that he doesn't know what custodian of the Constitution means. It's like, well, I told you not to eat the cookies out of the cookie jar, Johnny. Well, Sarah said I could, or Mandy said I could. No. See? It's a typical blame somebody else. Well, the legislation says I don't have to. Well, who wrote that legislation? Did the Irish people vote on that by any chance? So they're legislating these things and they're claiming that they're not accountable if they're unlawful. That's treason. That is sedition. We're talking about trying to overthrow the effectiveness of the implementation of the office of president. That's sedition. And then saying, well, when we've done that, we're not accountable to your courts. The president's not accountable to your courts. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? The president is accountable to the courts, or he's not the president. He is duty-bound as a prerequisite condition to check the constitutionality of bills prior to their enactment into the legislature, or he's not custodian of the Constitution. It wouldn't be reasonable to just pass everything as custodian of the Constitution. Yeah, that's fine, so is that. Yeah, that's grand, it's all good. And then 10 years later, when the whole thing falls down around your ankles, say, oh, well, whoops. Well, why didn't you check the lawfulness of these? Legislation says I don't have to. But you're custodian of the Constitution. Legislation says. Mandy said I could take the cookies. But I said you couldn't. the people tell him he's custodian of the Constitution, and they just go and scribble, well, Johnny that said, well, Mick the politician said, doesn't matter. You follow the Constitution as custodian of it. Or what are you following? And then if you fail to implement the Constitution, who are you accountable to? If a criminal president got in there, and I believe we have one at the moment, how would you hold him accountable to the courts? For all the aforementioned reasons, by the way, I'm not lacking evidence to back up my belief. You're held accountable to the courts of this land as a citizen of Ireland. Why would it be least of all the case to the one most endowed with preserving the constitution of the land? Why would he be least accountable instead of most, or equally as accountable? Then the courts are tasked with testing, and they don't. Then the highest court of the land, the Court of Appeal, the highest court of appeal in this country, said we should presume something's lawful, even though the High Court failed to test it when they were duty bound to, and they failed to test it while they were duty bound to, under judicial review. Certiorari was sought. Both courts elected to fail to test the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, showing exactly why they're telling the President that he doesn't have to check in the first place, so that this ambiguity can remain all the way to end user, so that accountability is removed, so that they can effectively create a treasonous, tyrannical dictator that Freemasonry tells what to write and pass. And they're not supposed to even be employed within organs of state because they're secret society members. And they have another agenda that is not in line with the Irish Constitution. So no, there's no such thing as presumptively constitutional. It's either constitutional or it's not. And I, as a citizen of Ireland, can give you a lawful command that you do not have to presume anything constitutional, because ignorance is no excuse in law. And you cannot be commanded by the Court of Ireland to remain in ignorance. So the Command of Ireland, I find, are committing treason and should be reprimanded with immediate effect. And I give you a lawful command. Do not obey presumptively constitutional. I'm a citizen of this country. I can give you a lawful command according to the Constitution. If our government has been occupied and usurped, there are usurpers in there, infiltrators, trying to negate and nullify the effectiveness of custodian of the Constitution and like positions of state, which are matters of national security. So I'm stepping up to the plate and doing right by you as your fellow citizen and telling you, do not obey presumptively constitutional, but instead hold them accountable to the Constitution. There's no such thing as presumptively lawful, and it can never exist, because we don't lack the schoolmaster. We don't lack the law to refer to. Just like I don't lack the Bible to check whether chapter 2, verse 3 of Genesis is present or not. And what it says, so I cannot presume on it. Cannot presume what it says. Why? It's right there. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work, which God created and made. So, the devil is afoot, and he is exposed before God of heaven. I've just done so. So you can check these things yourself. If you think that I might not be talking or telling the truth, you can check them online. You can Google, can the President in Ireland be held accountable to the courts of Ireland? And you'll see the unconstitutional legislation pop up on your screen. The President is duty bound as custodian to check the constitutionality of bills. If he's not doing that, he's not acting as custodian. but has breached his office and has compromised the position of custodian, and is no longer the servant of the Constitution, but of the entities making proposals in the forms of bills. And he is most certainly accountable to the courts of Ireland for any misconduct in his office, because who else would he be held accountable by? Unless you're claiming there's no accountability as custodian, which is, again, madness. Because the people who are in charge of national security, the certainty of the law, which is a matter of national security, are not least accountable, but most. A soldier that left his post would be shot. Why? Because it was so important that he kept that post, that he didn't regard the lives of his fellow citizens by departing from it and abandoning it, and was found in an unacceptable level of cowardice, which would mean he would be shot. So not least accountable, but most, when you're in a position of security. I don't advocate for the death penalty, but I do advocate for accountability, especially on matters of the law, of the land, and the integrity of well-functioning systems for the purposes of the common good and national security. We're talking about a serious high-level sedition attempt here, and it's conspiratorial, because you can see it from President to end Court of Appeal. All the way through, they've denied the test. They've decided not to carry it out. And these are educated, well-learned individuals. The mechanic can't look at the car and not know about the engine. The President cannot look at bills and not know about the constitutionality. So why would your mechanic check your car and try not to be held accountable? As the mechanic. Makes sense, does it? That's a breach of office. It's a compromise of the position. He's left his post. That's treason. It's sedition, because it was calculated. They had to form these legislations to create the facade that they were acting lawfully, and they weren't arrived at democratically. So they are in and of themselves unconstitutional because they didn't go through the proper processes. And now they're claiming that that's the norm. They don't have to go through the proper processes. That's further treason, further sedition. And it's very high-level stuff now. Freemasons are in government. I have it that Michael D. Higgins is a Freemason. You can ask him yourself. But a Freemason told me when I was a Freemason, because I didn't know what it was, and as soon as I knew, I left. I resigned from it. And I have it from a Freemason when I was in the order or the fraternity, sort of, because they'd lied to me all the way along, that Michael D. Higgins was a Freemason. And you're not supposed to be in office in government in Ireland and a Freemason. You're not supposed to be in the Guards, because they can have an opposed, an opposite agenda to that of the Irish people and the Irish government. So conflict of interest. So because of conflict of interest, they're not allowed in the police, but I know they are, because when I was a Freemason, many of the Freemasons there were Guards. So they're not following the Constitution of Ireland. They don't regard it. They don't care about it. They only care about their Freemasonic agenda, and that's satanic. They are Satanists. Witches and wizards shaking the hand of the devil and his demons. They're working with fallen angels, with demons, with Satan, and men are they. It's a complex, a spiritual complex that they're tapping into. and working on behalf of. So I've exposed it before you. I've done my duty by you and by God of heaven. He said, he who draws back, I have no pleasure with him, in him. So we will not draw back, but we will continue forth. So blessings, a holy kiss. May your house be safe from this government.